Okay. Well, welcome to our final day of this virtual summit. I'm really excited about this panel. It's near and dear to my heart because the panel is Mental Health and Web3, a good or bad marriage. And what we brought together is some great mental health practitioners, and that's what I am as well. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. Been waiting all week. Um, I'm gonna introduce the panelists, and then we can kind of explore some questions. So with us today is we have Jennifer Wahlberger. She is the co-founder of Sleepy Planet Parenting. We have Jeff Cohen, a psychotherapist and mindfulness meditation instructor. Victoria Sotelo, did I get that right? Yeah. A licensed individual marriage and family therapist out of New York. And we might have one more person joining us, Marianne Grinney, in a little while. So what I would love to do to start off is I want to hear about what interested you in getting involved in mental health. And maybe also you can describe a little bit of the populations that you work with in mental health. And maybe I can just start off with myself. So I was thinking about this question: why did I get involved in mental health? And I got involved because I wanted to understand my own mind. I grew up particularly in my 20s, man, I just did not launch as an adult. And as a result, there was a lot of depression and anxiety that I kind of bounced between. I had work that I was doing, but I was always struggling. I couldn't feel free, and I couldn't manage any relationships romantically. It was really, when I look back on that time, I think, wow, I was really living life with like two hands behind my back, really. So then in my early 30s, when I was looking for a career change, I thought of lots of different things, but mental health just stood out to me because like when I looked at the coursework, even for grad school, it was like, I want to know, I want to understand that better. And then also a big piece for me was just wanting to serve others. Like what could I do for work that maybe I could learn something about myself, but that I could really help others, and particularly others that maybe struggle with the things that I do. And one of my specialties as a therapist is I work with young adults and teens. So right around that cusp, that age of transitioning to adulthood, and trying to help them have a smoother launch than I did. So um, that's my story about why I got into it. And it keeps evolving as well, right? We as therapists, it keeps evolving. But I would love to hear from you. Maybe we can start off with you, Jen. Introduce yourself and let us know about your mental health journey.
Sure. I'm Jen Wahlberger, and I have a master's in social work. And I actually had a whole nother career before I went back in my 30s to get my MSW. I was working in publishing in magazines in New York City and wanted to be a writer, and found that the things that I was writing about and wanted to be writing about were all about what really makes people tick and what makes myself tick, and why do I do the things that I do, and why do I make the choices that I make. And Ian, you and I have talked about this. We had a somewhat similar young adulthood. I was making very different choices than a lot of my peers and colleagues to really take this deep dive into the internal landscape versus doing all of the more typical things of getting married and having kids. And it just continues to fascinate and drive me to this day to really consider, like, how are we orienting to this life experience from the inside out versus the outside in. And I think for me, it wasn't so much, although the mental health and the psychological pieces were always important to me, I've always, in social work, we're systems thinkers. So I'm always looking at that bigger picture of emotional health and social health and physical health and how connected we are to our communities and our families and each other, because they're all sort of, interrelated. So You know, it's a really rewarding field to work in because there's endless possibilities for that ongoing exploration.
Yeah, it really is. I hope we can dive into that, but it really does. It's bigger than just mental health anymore, right? There's so much more areas that we consider even in wanting to offer support. Thank you. Yeah. Jeff, how about yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Um, yeah, and kind of in my mid 20s, I had a similar, just I had a really tough time, existential crises, and I was asking myself really deep questions and having a lot of pause. And what really helped me during that time was I started getting into meditation, spirituality, and started just feeling a whole lot better, feeling like some guidance in life and getting my feet planted. And through that, I later had an opportunity to teach mindfulness, meditation principles and techniques in schools. So, working with youngsters, teaching 5-year olds how to meditate, teenagers how to meditate. And I just started that just as a volunteer, just to check it out. And I was getting so much more back from it than I was anticipating. And it felt kind of like a calling, like a thread to keep following. I really liked introducing things that can kind of feel complex to people, but just break it down very simply, and to see the inherent wisdom that kids were discussing and talking about, um, helping them like navigate emotions. I just really enjoyed that, and it felt like something I wanted to kind of keep going for and diving in for. And I then was wanting to then work with kids and people individually also, and that's what led me to then go back to school and start training as a psychotherapist. And so I work, uh, a majority of my practice is with kids still. So I work a lot with kids as young as about 5 or 6, and then teens. I work with adults too, but I still uh, am very involved in the kid realm and helping them navigate their bodies, their emotions, and helping them get some insight. And yeah, so it was a little bit of just kind of that's how it's unfolded, and it feels a little bit of a calling to help the youngsters, but I do enjoy it a lot.
That's awesome. Nice. Thank you. Victoria.
Yeah. My name is Victoria Sotelo. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York City. And I was raised in New York City. A lot of what Jen shared resonated with me, coming from a systematic way of thinking and training. And so my upbringing was in a very service-oriented family. My family was very involved in serving the city and the people of the city. And so I early on went and studied psychology, and also went into a different profession for a number of years, ended up starting my own business and consulting with very high net worth families in New York, and running different projects for them. And on the side, through my family and through my husband, was doing a lot of lay counseling without having my license at the time. And then after a number of years of doing that, went back and got my master's and specialized in really individual couple. I worked a lot with families early on and children. My practice now is all, I would say, about 85 to 90% couple work. So I work with heterosexual couples predominantly, do a lot of work around sexual intimacy and sex therapy. But I also do work with individuals and run different groups. So I think it was really early on that I wanted to have a place. I think going back and looking at my journals from being a teenager, writing things about listening to people, wanting to have a holistic approach to wholeness and health and to humanity, not just separating and segregating people out and compartmentalizing them, but recognizing that to help a community, there has to be a holistic approach. And I really learned that from my parents. You know, they were like these hippie activists in New York before I came into their life, and then they began to really work in the field of spiritual care through church organizations and then parachurch organizations where they ran schools and drug rehabilitation centers and did relief work for major tragedies that were going on in the city. So I was exposed to it at such a young age and was just naturally drawn to being around people. I love the mind, body, spirit connection. And I love the integration of who humanity is. And that's just how my mind thought as a child. So when I got into the field, oh, it was just so incredible. I hear Jeff saying, you look at the different courses and, you look at the different things you're studying, and it's so rewarding. The training I did was all systemic in its approach. I did a family systems approach to mental health and wholeness. So it was fascinating to just be able to really see the way people's minds and their bodies and the spirit is so interconnected and needs to have a space to know that it can flow. All those rivers, all those streams are flowing into a larger place. And so I really was drawn to it. And I love marriage. I love passionate marriages and excited, energized marriages. My parents are married 50 years. I've been married for 26. And I think it was just something that I wanted to see, a space where people could celebrate the beauty of who they were individually and then collectively in the marriage and in the family. So that was really what drew me. And that probably is what keeps me going and involved and engaged in the work that I do.
Love it. Yeah, what I hear everybody kind of talking about is this mental health, I think, can get thrown into just the mind. We're just paying attention to the mind. But Victoria, you talked about the spirit. Jenny talked about this physical body, the relationships helps. It's so much bigger than that, right? So I'm wondering if we can kind of help talk about what are the different aspects of actually what it means to be a mental health practitioner, and what are the different areas of your clients' lives you're actually looking into and looking to help them with. I don't know if Jen, you want to start us off around that, but what, like, mental health, how encompassing is it?
Well, in my work, so I work with mostly mothers and parents and families. And I actually started my career as a psychotherapist, but I transitioned into, I call it really just consultation now. I lead groups for new moms and moms of older kids as well. And I still do private sessions, but it's very much more focused like on a specific thing that's going on for that family. So I'm not even at this point in my career coming to the table with whether it's a group or an individual client with a lens of mental health necessarily, because I really want to, see that bigger picture and know that bigger picture for each person I'm getting to know. That's where I'm starting. So in my groups, for instance, we do an 8-week session where the topics kind of flip-flop back and forth between baby-centered topics like feeding and sleep and development, and then mom-centered topics like your marriage, your couple relationship, your shifting identity as a person, how it is to be a mom who also works, the relationships with your extended family and those grandparents. So, many of our groups end up going on for at least the first year, if not much longer. And we're constantly broadening and widening and expanding all of that terrain. Like, there's no aspect of life that we don't address in those groups and in my private sessions as well. And I tend to, one of the things I'm sure we can all remember about being in graduate school, you're taught to meet the client where they are. And so what I find these days especially is that many people are really struggling, and they don't even understand that it's because there's, possibly stress and strain in multiple areas of their lives. And that having somebody who can help you kind of see, like, I draw a little diagram in my mom groups where you're sort of like at the center of a wheel. And then we make like pieces of the pie for the different aspects of your life, including the spiritual. I'm glad you brought that in, Victoria. Again, these relationships with extended families, your work, your couple relationship, and you can sort of track, like, how big is that piece of the pie in terms of the energy and attention I'm giving to it and what I'm receiving. And is that really in line with where I want it to be? And it can be very powerful to kind of identify, like, oh, one of the main reasons that my life isn't working right now is because I don't have enough support. Maybe in my couple relationship or maybe from extended family. And now, how can I identify those needs and how can I go about asking for those needs to be met and figuring out? So, I think the old paradigm of mental health is, what's wrong with me and my biochemistry, and let me take a drug to fix that, versus hopefully this newer understanding that we have that, again, we aren't just these like islands that exist as individuals. We're inexplicably intra-connected with everyone and everything in our environment, and it's a very dynamic relationship. And understanding how to open up some of those pathways can also help us feel well.
That's so true. Yeah. We here at this conference is put on by spiritual beings, and the idea was to put spirit first over everything. And it spoke to my heart to want to participate in this and join this little startup, because that's how I orient my life. And ultimately, as you said, Jen, we're all so connected, right? On deep, deep levels that we can't even really understand, deeper than just your mental health. So, but meeting the client where they're at is important. And if somebody wants to come in for just some aspect, then that's where we start with them, right? Jeff, do you have anything to kind of add around how encompassing is mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with everything Jen was saying, and just through the lens of working a lot with children and families, I feel like it's becoming more and more acceptable and understandable how all-encompassing it is and how holistic of approach it is. That mental health, physical health, emotional health, relational health. It's not all these kind of compartments where sometimes parents will think that the kid, kind of like you were saying, Jen, is an island, and it's like, just teach him a couple tools and then he'll be fine, and I'm trying to bring it all together, how the parents are interacting, the kid is picking up consciously and unconsciously, and so they're like sponges. And so working really hard at helping kids kind of increase their awareness, and parents increase their awareness to see how everything is relating to itself and to each other, and treating everything with more compassion, even when we're slipping up, or if things aren't going well, or if we're falling short, if we feel like we're falling short, to have a lot of compassion for this as we're learning how interconnected we are. And it's been interesting too, doing a lot of work virtually, and trying to do this since the pandemic started, how everything's moved to online. So trying to do this virtually, and having a lot of compassion for that as well. Yeah, and so I think the lines, the compartmentalization, and it's starting to thin a little bit more, and helping people see that and understand that, and see how sleep and diet, everything does influence our emotional health, our mental health, how our relationships are aiding that. And a big part of the work is helping in my work that I do with kids, is helping the parents see that, and also to help the parents see the kid, their child, for who they are, not for who they want them to be or what their shortcomings are. to kind of see the kid more holistically and to notice their reactions to how the kid is behaving, if it's good or bad in their eyes, but that they have it with a bigger awareness and seeing the source of things, as instead of, oh, my kid doesn't listen in school, or this happens, or he just gets so angry, to stop and check your reactions and notice how that could be affecting your child and yourself. And so I think it really does come down to just being patient and compassionate with ourselves as we learn to kind of break the walls down of the compartmentalization of mental health as just this one pillar, and that it's all related.
Mm. Yeah, I have that same experience where parents will, obviously the child will be struggling, and the parents said, just come fix my child, and I think we know as systems therapists that it's the system and the child's just acting out because the system's kind of screwed up. The challenge then becomes, can you make the parents, or can you help the parents open to that, right? Can they open to being willing to make changes themselves? And sometimes parents aren't, they're just not willing to. They're overstressed, whatever it is. And that becomes the challenge for, as the therapist. Victoria, I'm curious, anything to kind of add to this?
Yeah, I think we've heard some great things already. So, the one thought that came to my mind as I was listening is just even stepping back and asking ourselves the question, right? What is it to have a mind or a mental health or wholeness? And when you step back and think about that, there's almost, in my mind, no way to think about that just isolated. When we're looking at somebody who's unwell, it's often coming from so many different sources, right? It's coming from within the person, and then externally. It's the intricate system of what's happening within the mind and the spirit, your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, and what's going on all around you, and how that space between you and others is being perceived and interpreted and experienced. And so to me, there's just no way to separate it from the whole person. I don't think that we have a model, the model of a problematic way of thinking about humanity, and come in, tell me your problem, and I'm here to help fix it or resolve it or solve it, whatever it is, or lessen it, right, is to me a model that does not work well. And the patient, the client, knows it doesn't work well. And they often come in saying that. They come in telling you that. I've been working from 6 a.m. to 8 o'clock at night. And I'm very successful. I'm at the top of my field. I've had lots of doors open for me. And I am depleted as a person. My relationships are unwell. When I'm by myself, I don't feel okay. My thoughts are not going to a healthy place. When people begin to think and experience that, they are just resonating what is the true essence of humanity, that we can't section any one part of ourselves off. So I think the conversation for mental health has in the last 15 years, I think there's been a push for a biopsychosocial spiritual model for mental health. I can think of a love and addiction conference I went to 12 years ago, where that was the whole focus, right? International conference where people wanted to bring in someone like Jeff and what he does, and bringing mindfulness and awareness to what's happening, so that a person can then be empowered again to their own internal wisdom that they've lost sight of. So yeah, I think the mental health field is broad, extremely broad. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to connect with other people in other professions, right? Making sure that I have references to give for mindfulness, for someone like Jen who works and creates a space for parents to think in this new role, how they're being formed. How is their mind, body, and spirit being formed as they step into this new role, which is very shocking to some people and off kiltering, right? We know that most relationships undergo great transition and strain when a first child is born into a family system. So also, I think what is so powerful about mental health and the space that we're in virtually, which was not my area of comfort at all. I mean, let me start out by saying I didn't find it comfortable. A few years before everything took place, I was in conferences and talks about trying to shift to virtual teletherapy, and many people were opposed to it. And then we were thrown into it and realized that we could become uncomfortable and then learn how to get very active and comfortable in that space. So it was kind of like, you had to kind of learn how to do it. Like some people throw the baby in and say, they're going to learn how to swim. We didn't know what we were doing initially. And so I would say I was uncomfortable initially in the virtual space with my clients. I didn't know if I would be able to be as empathetic and show that human energy to them that I thought was so powerful in the therapy space. So it was a learning experience, and I think it still is. But for sure, it created an incredible avenue for us to be able to push through boundaries and obstacles that were no longer there for us. We could just click a button. So I think that not only has the mental health space shifted, the accessibility and the openness to be able to provide services and support has greatly shifted through the virtual field. So I think that's where I go when I think about mental health and where it reaches, clearly almost everywhere.
Yeah. Oh God, that's so fascinating. You were advocating for it, and then when it hit, you're like, oh God. That's great. I love that. Yeah, I mean, this is perfect segue, into how this mental health profession is evolving. And we evolve to meet the needs of people, right? I mean, and like right now, technology seems to be continuing to expand and to grow. And so it's only going to be natural that mental health is going to start to meet those needs. And I think the big sort of shock to the system was certainly the pandemic and everybody having to go online. And I know now some people have stayed online, like my practice has stayed online, but for other people, it's actually gone back into person or some combination of that. This group that we've put together with you all is also looking about how Web3 is going to interact. And Web3 is really, for any of you on this call that are not so familiar with that, is it's a decentralization and blockchain. So it's this idea that the Web2 was so centralized, and Web1 was just AOL typing in a chat room. So here we have this Web3 where all of a sudden you don't need some centralized entity that's taking your information and selling it to happen anymore, but we can still interact and connect, and it can all happen with new technology like blockchain. So it's really exciting for people that are in that, but there's so much stress and anxiety that happens around that too. And so I just love for us to talk about what you're seeing with technology right now, and what you see as far as mental health and where we're going. Certainly we've gone online, but what else? Anybody can jump in on this one. And I see my picture is shining really bright. I'm not really sure what's going on here. I'll try to fix it.
I was like, oh wow, you're glowing as we step into the web, 3 world.
I'll figure that out when you answer the
one
question.
thought I have, one of the negative impacts of the virtual space that we've been seeing as a concern is, right, people sometimes over isolating, and then also having such an excess of content. They're almost frozen. They don't know what to do with all the content that they have and information. And they also need beautiful spaces like the ones I imagine Jen's providing through these groups where they can process that information. So I think one of the beautiful things that could happen is we could provide more access, incredible access to so many people who may not be able to ever have stepped into a therapy space. Socioeconomically, shifting the entire dynamic of who gets to access resources is profound through the virtual space. And also, I imagine almost like, I don't know if this is how it will work. Like I said, I'm kind of, inexperienced a little bit with that part of the world, but I imagine that they could step into a room and do like a meditation. Could Jeff lead a mindfulness meditation, and then you could step into a space where you're sitting in a group talking after you've already done that? And I do think that would be profound. I think it would be incredible to try something like that. I think it could be really incredible to provide services. Services would become more holistic and more integrated. Instead of just coming in and speaking with your clinician for 50 minutes, or some sessions are only 30 minutes, depending on how people practice. You could have that layered in with different supports for the people in a group or individually. That part of it is very exciting when I think about it.
And you're talking about like this idea of like really online, like almost metaverse in a sense. Like it could be a virtual place that you go to that could holistically support you.
Yes, I'm talking about that. And then the other side of that would be that you get some of those resources in your virtual space, and then you bring them into a localized physical space. I do think that there's something that in my mind, right? Maybe 5 years from now, I will be evolving to think something else. But in my mind, I cannot get past the need for human connection. We're created cellularly, and cells require connecting with other cells at the most micro level. And so I can't understand a world where humanity would not need that at the most micro level. If it's needed, I believe it's going to be needed in the most powerful place, which is in human relationship and wholeness.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be such a fine line, especially I see so much of it working with kids. They have the VR sets, they're getting those for Christmas and holidays and birthdays. And so they spend an abundance of time on there. And there definitely is a line where it is too much. They get kind of removed from their own reality and what their space they're inhibiting, and their sense of self. I remember I was recently working with a kid, and I was asking them something about how they're feeling, or something what they're going through emotionally, and they started talking about what their avatar was feeling in their virtual game, which was very interesting. I mean, that's not like an all bad thing, because also like they did have some awareness. They were walking through what they were feeling and why they were feeling it, but also it was very distant from approaching themselves. So it can be interesting but some of it I think can be very healthy. I mean, even for me, when as like a meditation practitioner, there was a lot of teachers I was wanting to do workshops with or do retreats with, but they were like in Europe or India or all over the world. And right when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden everyone is offering these things online. And I'm like, oh my God, I can just sit in my room and have access to this wisdom. And that was refreshing. So I think that's a positive thing that can happen. And like what Victoria was saying about too, I think it can bring like-minded people together. Like if somebody's going through something, or even in the population I work with kids and teens, if they're going through something challenging and difficult, maybe they can find a virtual space or group where it's like-minded people getting together. I think a lot of it too is with these metaverses and Web3, it's the intention behind the programs or the rooms being created. I think that's a big piece of it, because if the intention is to bring people together and it's for healing, I think that can happen for sure. But if it's more profit driven or something, then it can actually then remove us from ourselves as well. So it's kind of a balance, but I definitely do see things moving that direction. And kind of like what Victoria was saying also, I can see in the future everyone wearing a headset and going to like a group or a group therapy or something, but in feeling a sense of connection if they're not necessarily getting that emotionally with the friends that they have. But it is something to keep an eye on, because nothing trumps human interaction, and I think that needs to be the primary core, but something that we're having to adapt to with technology.
I so agree, Jeff, with what you were just saying there about, technology itself is neutral, right? Web3 is neutral. It's all about the intention and the consciousness we bring to it, because it can be used for connection and expansion, education, growth, learning, all kinds of things. And it can also be used as another addiction and a place to hide. And so I think that, I sort of think of two perspectives on this. One is the perspective of, as providers, how are we engaging with technology to enhance or augment the offerings that we may have in person? The other piece is for our clients, like, is technology serving, not serving, some combo of those things, right? So Victoria, you touched on so many of the, I think, benefits, and you did too, Jeff, of from the provider side. Like, I feel like, sky's the limit with Web3 in terms of, like, how realistic we can really make it feel, to sit in maybe a virtual room and gather and be together. I mean, like everybody else who's spoken so far, I love technology, but I'm not actually the most facile with it when it comes to my own use. And so the learning curve for me to do my groups and private sessions on Zoom was steep. But because it was the pandemic and because people needed that connection so badly, we all figured it out. I figured it out. Like everybody was saying, I was also happily surprised to find, like, it's not as bad as I thought. It's actually a decent substitute. That said, 100% almost of the moms in all of my circles were like, when can we be done with this and get back to being in person? So now it's like, oh, in our very rare rainy day or the weather's not cooperating or something, we'll hop on Zoom. But they really want that in-person connection. There's a very different sensory experience that we have in person, where we're picking up on the subtleties of nonverbal communication, body language, the tone, the inflections in someone's voice. There's just a more organic flow, I find, in a group setting, especially. We've all been in those awkward Zoom calls where it's like nobody's talking and then people are on top of each other. So there's just, some of those protocols to figure out. But I think there's probably a lot more to discover in terms of, taking the best of what is useful about being, using technology to connect both with individuals and groups. And, again, being intentional and deliberate about what really serves and what we want to create. And I think it could be interesting and exciting to imagine moms from all over the world being in group together in some sort of virtual setting. On the client side, I'll just start with the kids. What I'm seeing with kids is that they actually see technology as an extension of themselves, which is both fascinating and terrifying, right? I just think tech is going to be such a part of their lives, forever. And there's no world that I see where you're just not using technology. So here again, we have this opportunity to be very intentional with kids and how we're teaching them to use it and how we're modeling how we're using it. So, parents have a much higher bar now for themselves to really switch that technology off when it's time to connect as a family and say, like, this matters the most. We can have fun, we can learn, we can enjoy technology, but this, relationship that we're having one-on-one, individually, and with each other as a whole family is always the most important thing. And I, the parent, am never going to let myself or you, that child, get so sucked in that you're losing sight of this, right? I mean, I could go on and I won't, but the last thing that I'll just say here is one other piece that really fascinates me is how the brain, doesn't distinguish between a real and an imagined experience. And so I think there's so much to explore with, mental health, since that's our focus here today, like putting someone in a virtual setting to meditate, to just be in a naturescape or any other kind of, experience that makes us feel calm, happy, and relaxed. What are the implications for someone being able to enhance their mental health services with that kind of technology for the good?
So I don't know if it's okay for me to say, you just brought a thought to my mind when you said that. I thought, when we go back to the idea of accessibility for mental health services and what could those spaces be, if since we know that a real experience or an imagined experience impact the mind, body, and spirit, right? They do. Could that change the way that we deal with people who we are attempting to rehabilitate through the prison system, let's say, right? Could that completely change how they get to access services that would be more healing for them than confining them in a solitary space, right? I mean, it's profound where we can go if we don't see it as an obstacle to the world that we have all, I think most of us, been a part of before this started, right? So I think every generation is struck with the need to either accept or resist what's coming in front of it. And I think, like what I started out saying in the conversation, was early on, the field of psychotherapy was predominantly more opposed. I sat for 7 years on the board for New York State marriage and family therapists. And I would say the conversation was, most of the people were more opposed to going virtual than being in a physical space. But if we aren't thinking about it from the good and the bad, just those two polarized places, instead of just what's health, what's a healthy marriage, what makes it good or bad, what's healthy. And if we're thinking about it more neutral, like you're saying, Jen, then we have a lot of freedom to become creative. And I believe that our core values will guide the creativity instead of profit or our own pride or our own ego or anything else that could get in the way. But if we have core values, we can have a lot of creativity in the space. And with that thought in mind, there of course needs to be a profound voice in the spiritual space for mental health. So I just see, like you said, the sky is the limit. And there's so many things I'm thinking about. Clients bring their avatar self into session. I've had many clients use their avatar self as a visualization. Again, it's not my world that I live in, but when they bring it in, I just go with it and I let them visualize and I let them kind of connect with that person that is functioning and processing their trauma even differently. I can see this being profound in how we do trauma work even. Because if the brain is able to work through and heal in a certain space, then it has freedom to move into another place, right? So
that's fascinating. The whole idea of the avatar. It almost reminds me of play therapy. We're taught to help with kids, and they externalize onto this object. Maybe it's a toy or it's a stuffed animal, and they talk about their feelings and they externalize their desires through that play. It could be the same thing with an avatar, right? Because it'd be so fascinating to see what somebody puts into their avatar, their maybe things that they're struggling with, but also things that they wish they could do in their real life. Maybe play therapy will expand into adults. And in many ways it is. I mean, this Web3 space is like, it's this play thing right now. It's so fascinating, just what's out there and the energy and excitement that's there. What I really like that you're kind of all touching on is that, and I've been saying this all week in the different groups that I've been leading and a part of, is that we had Web 1 and then we had Web 2. And right now Web 2 is like, oh, that's bad. That's all these corporations. Like the Web 2 there's so much on it that's terrible. Like, I don't know. People are stealing, there's porn, there's just negativity, but that's us as humans. Like Jen said, Web 2 it's just neutral. So here we have Web 3, and it's exciting right now, and it's this new frontier, and there's so much money and energy going into it. But it'll just become whatever the reflection of where we are as humans. So if we want to create something new, we can't just hope and expect that creating the technology will somehow do that for us. We have to bring something forward. And I really hope that in this space that we bring forward our spirit, mind, body, mental health. We place a huge priority on that in the space. And I hope that there's avenues for that. I know that I did an interview last night with this group of people. They're not mental health practitioners, but they do this Twitter Spaces group every week, and they call it I'm going full light beam again. So what they do is they create a space once a week where people can come in. You can be anonymous, and so your avatar pops up on the screen, or you can have your name, and it's called a safe space, and you just share what's going on. They bring a pretty particular topic, and for some people that's a good entry point. Other people are engaging in Discord in these sort of NFT groups, and they're bringing up questions that are really deep in their struggles. And there's slowly, I think that the projects are starting to bring on mental health practitioners to actually answer them in a meaningful way. But it's such a fascinating conversation. I wish we could keep it going. I feel like we're starting to get to the meat of it, but we are. I want to respect time. I want to thank you all for participating, and anybody interested that will listen to this after the broadcast. You have a wonderful practitioner in New York, a couple, Jeff and Jen, that are out here in LA, and I'm sure you can reach out to their social media handles if you're interested in anything that they've talked about or want to learn more. And I hope this conversation continues, and maybe we can have you back at some point, all of you, especially as Web3 evolves, which will be quick. Right.
We can come as our avatars. Yeah.
That's right.
I was wondering if I was supposed to create one of those little avatars. I had no idea what to do. That would be wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to be in this space, and thank you for the ideas that have even been generated in this short conversation about how we can take a step forward rather than taking a step kind of down or back in fear or uncertainty, but be willing to speak into the space and create awareness for spirituality in this world that is going to be so necessary. Because if we thrive in every place and we lose the sense of our soul or spirit, we're really lost in so many ways. Yeah. So it's essential that we keep the main thing, right? And the main thing is not any object or any experience even. It's what our greatest design is for. God gave each of us a beautiful design, and we need to live that to its fullest, whether that's in Web3 or, out on the street in LA or New York City. So thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. And I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
What a great note to end on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, have a beautiful rest of your day. And again, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.